I think that people are very good at seeing only half of the trade-offs. We're only good at seeing the good trade-offs of the thing we want or like, and only the bad trade-offs of the thing we don't like or don't want. But we're not good about seeing the good trade-offs of the thing we don't like or don't want. And we're not good about seeing the bad trade-offs of the thing we do like.
Create for No Reason is your weekly dose of inspiration to create what you believe should exist in the world. It's where passion meets craft, and we explore the joy of the creative process and building a meaningful body of work. This episode is so much fun. It's going to get you thinking about creativity and your life and the decisions that you want to make for your future. We talked about confirmation bias. We talked about how our past influences our future and how there's always an opportunity to make a different decision, to go a different direction. We talked about getting really focused versus being more of a generalist when it comes to your creativity and your career. We got into all the things. So I was joined by my friend, Jeremy Pelley, who is a creative consultant, and he has run an agency. He works with a lot of organizations and businesses around their branding. And so he knows design and art. And he's also, like you, multi-passionate. He cares a lot about other creative pursuits and has his hands in multiple areas in the creative process. And so we talked about so many different ideas around creativity and what that looks like. And it was a fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm excited about our conversation.
Of course, Kate. Yeah, it's good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So Jeremy and I met because we actually got to do a recording together. I got to interview Jeremy for another show, which was really fun. And after the episode, you and I started talking about art and design and music and inspiration and creativity. And I said, you know what, you have to come on Create for No Reason and let's talk about it. So why don't you share with the listeners a little bit about yourself? Who are you, Jeremy?
Of course, yeah. I'll start at the beginning. I'm a creative director and creative consultant. I specialize in brand strategy and brand design, brand development. I really try to. I've been, in the industry for about 2 decades now. Rather than focusing on an industry, I focus on brands that I can believe in, if that makes sense. I'd rather be industry agnostic, so I can, have an opportunity where it presents itself if I can align with either the person behind the brand or the brand itself, what they're contributing, or, what I think, they're solving for in general. And that's the long and short of it. Like I like to build brands that matter. I like to contribute something positive. And so that's the long and short of what I do.
What about your work? Because I love that it's so clear that you are really passionate about the brands that you work with and that you really do care about getting them out into the world so other people can have a really good experience with them. So what about your work has been the most fulfilling?
Wow. Well, there's a couple different categories. I think the most fulfilling when it comes to the brands themselves are when something finally becomes like real and it's not on my screen anymore. It's not just an idea on paper, that I've helped somebody, realize what, this thing that they've been struggling with forever, and now it exists as a product or a service in the world, and it's actually working. Like, that's infinitely satisfying, always will be satisfying every time it happens over and over. It's almost like a magic trick has happened. And but for me, I think another level of satisfaction comes from just like the sheer learning that I get from being industry agnostic. I find myself frequently as an outsider to any given brand that I work on. Like, I've worked on everything from a horse track betting, a racetrack in Portland, Oregon, to handheld bidets, to hotels and restaurants, to cannabis brands when cannabis went legal in Oregon. Like, I've worked on all sorts of things. And each time I find myself at the beginning not knowing much more than I know. And so it puts me a little bit back on my heels in a good way, where I feel like I'm challenged, not unlike how their ultimate customers will be challenged to understand their brand. So I feel like if I can get on board with caring about it in a real way, not in a forced way, but in like, I really actually think this is serving a purpose, solving a problem, filling a niche, like, then I feel like I'm able to, communicate that better, with my client to their customer ultimately. So that continual learning of what I get to learn about is so fun.
And you get to have your hands in a lot of it's creative work, right? I mean, essentially what you do for a living is creative work. And you also are very passionate about other forms of art, which a lot of people on this show can relate to, right? The listeners, the guests that we have, we're very multi-passionate. We have a lot of things that we want to do.
Hmm.
And so how do you, when it comes to your career and what you're doing as far as what you're doing for work and what you're doing for fun and creating for just the sake of creating, what does that look like? What's that balance?
These are great questions. Like I'd say that my life changed dramatically, like all of ours did, and around the 2020 mark, and kind of still is getting. It's been on a meandering path. I'm still kind of getting back to a path of clarity where I have my clear motivations and disciplines around creation. But I would say like it shifted. Like before 2020, I was much more lackadaisical with like my creation. Like I'm interested in creation in general. Like I am no musician, but I love to play music. I have, instruments all strewn about the house, and I'll pick them up randomly and play them.
How
But
many do you play? How many
n-
instruments do you play?
not none technically. It's like not well, but I can drum a little bit, and I can play the guitar a little bit, and I can play the keyboards a little bit. Really, I'm more interested in just kind of making noise and patterns and rhythms, and just seeing like if I can make something that sounds beautiful, because I'm really just interested in making beautiful things. So it's like if it's not music, then like I've always loved photography, and forever and ever, long before Instagram, I used to shoot with like toy cameras, Polaroid cameras, Holgas, Dianas, all sorts of stuff. And once Instagram came about and film got harder and harder to get my hands on and develop, a lot of things went digital, and I went, using my iPhone just to capture like the similar kind of subject matter, which I would call myself more of a scavenger photographer rather than a studio photographer. Like I go out and I find beautiful vignettes that I find beautiful, but I think that the average person overlooks them as like, oh, that's a stack of wood pallets, or that's just a smudge on the sidewalk or whatever. But certain things stand out to me and look painterly, or they look interesting, and so I'll capture these quiet moments, and use my Instagram as like a little gallery, a quiet gallery for myself. Like I don't really use Instagram or social media in the right ways. Like that, and I'm not really focused on being an influencer as much as I'm just kind of begrudgingly holding on to like my old ways a little bit. Like I'm a very analog kind of person, especially more and more in the information age. I feel like we benefit from having hands-on hobbies and from analog things. And so I like to cook. It's another creative expression. I think not only do I like to cook, I like to plate. I think that like I learned how to cook really well in restaurants. I'm no chef, but I've learned chef techniques. I learned knife techniques and plating and all that kind of stuff. And so I tend to take pride in making something, time it well, plate it well, make a beautiful plate. So then I get to enjoy a beautiful meal. So, it ranges. It's like I tend to think of, if we think of what creation is, it's like the biggest creator is God, right? And so it's like we get closer to our God nature when we are a creator as well. And so whatever we can do to create is a good thing. And I'll be transparent. My personal art practice in the past few years has fallen off a cliff a little bit because I've been so focused on the pragmatic. I've been so focused on, things like cooking or things like being effective. As a professional creative, it puts a pressure in my view, in my vista around like how I'm spending my creative energies. And I think that's kind of a mistake on my part. I think I need to get out of that and get back to the name of your podcast, creating just for creating's sake, creating just for fun. Who knows what that'll look like, but I'm definitely feeling the itch these days.
Ooh, well, what I think is interesting is you recognize that and then you can make the decision. So it's kind of like with this show, right? I stopped doing the show a year and a half ago, and then I was getting that you call that itch again, thinking, oh my gosh, I really enjoyed it. I had these really wonderful conversations and
Hmm.
conversations that I think are important for people to hear because of exactly what you just said and creating for the sake of creating. So you took some time off, but how do you think about, because I think about this too, because I am very passionate about a lot of art and music and forms of creating.
Hmm.
And so sometimes I would look at someone who has been extraordinarily focused in one area, one direction, one practice. And then some people have done a lot of different things in different areas. And I don't know that it's good or bad either way. It's really just how people have decided to live their life. And so it's not good or bad. It's really just, hey, as long as you are happy in what it is that you're creating. But how do you think about that? Because you said that you think maybe it was a mistake, but was it a mistake because you
Yeah.
really enjoyed cooking?
Right. No, it's a valid point, and I tend, yeah, that's a good catch. I tend to not believe in mistakes as much as I believe in lessons, and I believe like that we are where we need to be, no matter how we judge it, right or wrong. We aren't just on a path; we are our path. So you can't really even get off of your path. You can't really make a wrong move. That's the kind of funny thing that it's hard to remember, especially in the hard times, that that's true. But it's proven itself to be true to me over and over. And I've always been a generalist, when it comes to, and I think it benefits me. I think that at the end of the day, I look at it like a cross training, like in the sense that like being alive is a creative act. Like everything that's alive, like a plant will produce leaves and flowers produce petals, and everything that's alive produces something. And the only things that don't produce things are dead things. So I feel that like even no matter what your profession, if you're an accountant or if you're whatever, an economist, you're still a creative professional. You just might not be pushing pixels around or drawing things or writing words. You're creatively solving problems in your field. So in that way, it's like I see all of the different aspects of what I do creation wise as part of the whole. Like they're all very useful, for sure. It's just I think it's more about that kind of concept of beginning with the end in mind. I think certain creative aspects, when they need to be useful, or pragmatic or whatever, then I am much more critical about like beginning with the end in mind. And I think it's nice to have projects where you don't need to think like that, where you simply just get messy and experiment and try things, and maybe even break things. Like that statement, move fast and break things. And like I think it was said about tech, it applies to creative as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it almost gives you more creative freedom when you don't have such this idea of what it needs to look like or be. And when I was writing a little bit about even just getting back into the podcast,
Mhm.
someone asked me about it, and I wrote back. I said, "I want it to become what it wants to become." And as silly as that might sound, 'cause it's a podcast. It doesn't, but I feel like it becomes its own piece of art, and I'm just gonna flow with it. And of course, I have ideas of where I would go and people that I would love to have on the show, and all of those ideas that come along with it. But just this freedom of I'm just gonna start and I'm gonna have conversations, and one conversation at a time is going to open up new experiences and new conversations and introduce me to new people, and that's really what creating is all about in whatever platform. Even when you get into music or art or poetry, you recognize very quickly, if you get into it, oh my gosh, there's whole communities dedicated to this form of art, and you didn't even know that a year ago. Like, it's so fascinating to me when you learn. I mean, I think about, cuz I'm really into health and fitness, and so you think about health and fitness, and there's pockets of people that are obsessed with their yoga or obsessed with their Pilates or
Yes,
CrossFit. I mean, all the people, and they have these principles and these philosophies, and that's kind of what they're run by. And I think creatives feel very similarly in that regard. And we all have
absolutely.
kind of our own creative practice. What does your creative practice look like? Whether you're approaching a song or music or art or your graphic design, anything that you're doing, do you have a specific practice?
Well, when it comes to exploring new things, like music is perpetually new because I can't read or write music, and like I just like I hear things. I have a very broad music taste. I listen to all sorts of stuff from all eras, and ranging literally from classical and opera to metal and hip hop to music from Zambia 1970 to whatever. And if it's beautiful, it's interesting to me. And sometimes I will isolate a track and just try to learn it, and I'll just like I'll mimic it. So mimicking is one of my methods of seeing what I can do that gets me close to what is so compelling and magical about this beautiful thing that I'm drawn to. And so in like once I go beyond the mimicking stage, then I start to just play around with the the aspects of the instrument itself, and start to like just see like I can do with it. Like what, like is a guitar just a stringed instrument, or is it a percussion instrument too, or is it something like, how, like, can I play it wrong and that be right, type of thing. That's how people figured out slide guitars and all sorts of stuff, right? It's like like they did it with a weird bottle one day and they're like, hey, this is a thing that sounds amazing. It's like a lot of exploration, a lot of mimicking, like, like learning from the masters, quote unquote. I like to look at a lot of things in the world. Like, when I'm working on branding, I will typically look outside of the industry that I'm working in. Like, say I'm working on a hotel, I won't look to other hotels for inspiration. I'll look to jazz for inspiration for a hotel. I'll look to poetry or art. I'll look to certain eras of art or architecture for, inspiration, rather than sticking within the industry. Because I think that really so much of creativity is about unique combinations of thoughts, unique combinations of ideas. So I try to like have a very useful and deep bucket that I pull from when it comes to these inspirations to pull them together.
There's so much conversation around social media and influencers and how to grow, and it's when people talk about creating, I think one of the biggest questions that people start asking, if you tell them, "Oh, I'm starting a YouTube channel, or I'm going to start a blog or a podcast," they say, "Well, how are you going to monetize it? How
Hmm.
are you going to monetize it? How are you going to get millions of subscribers? Like, what is your ultimate plan?" And it's so that's always one of the first questions, and I find it so interesting. So when you think about, if somebody is listening and they're thinking, they kind of have that in their thought process, right? If I start a creative project, there has to be some type of monetary value to it. What would you say to them?
Man, it's a tough one, because it's like they're not wrong and they're not right in that thinking. Like that's what I would say right out of the gates. It's like, yes, we need to monetize things, and yes, we need to make money to survive in this world. But I think to have that as a specific end goal can stand in the way of true creativity and like letting, as you said earlier, letting things become what they need to be. Because you look to real world examples, and it's like, Joe Rogan, one of the largest podcasts in the world, started off like, I mean, he was an actor and a comedian first. He was a comedian first and foremost, actor second, then UFC announcer third, and then finally a podcaster fourth. And now he's arguably most famous for his podcasting and most wealthy from his podcasting. But for the first 5 years, he didn't make any money off of it. He just simply did it all the time because it was fun. And he wanted to like have a format and a platform to talk to interesting people about interesting things. And so it wasn't more complicated than that. He didn't try to monetize it. If anything, he tried not to, I would argue, and I think he would probably argue that too. So there's countless examples like that. He's just one of many. But I feel that, yeah, I think money comes from consistent effort, and that's the thing. It's like those that you mentioned, obsessions earlier. People get obsessed like with their yoga or with this or that. And there is a very smart designer named Stefan Sagmeister, that I've been a fan of for a long time, that put out a book years ago, and one of his quotes from that book was that my obsessions make my work better and my life worse. And it's
Oh,
very true, very
that's so
relatable.
good.
Yeah, it's like it's so true, because it does make your work better. I mean, we do need to become obsessed with something, if not multiple things. But we can recognize that obsession can be taken so far, that it can make our lives, we're not getting sleep when we need to, we're not eating if we need to, things like that. So we have to watch for both.
Yeah, it's I think about some of my practices, and I'm so extraordinarily disciplined in some areas of my life, but so disciplined to the point where it can be a little bit challenging. But, all of these things come along with the work, and when you're really passionate about creating and about work and about the work.
Hmm.
We were talking earlier about, you have been threatening to write a book. So let's talk about this year. Let's make this the podcast that you declare that you're writing your book and you get started on it.
I'm into it. I'm into that challenge. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's true. It's like I've loved writing forever. I'm a verbose, gregarious person, so words come right out of me. And I think what has inspired me to want to write books is seeing how much natural principles or first principles in life really come out in the creative process over and over and over, and how there's a lot of useful like mental models that can be applied to a lot of things that come out of the creative process, whether that be something like you're creating or if you're simply just trying to create yourself. And that's kind of the process I'm in now. Is like I mentioned earlier, 2020 changed the world for everybody, some more than others, and but I think we're all still recovering from it, both economically and spiritually on some level, because things just flow differently now in society. Things are still far more online than they are digital or analog. They're not as physical. Like just the other day, I thought about going to a movie theater to see a movie, and it's like, wow, I was thinking back, like when was the last time I went to a theater? It's been a long time, and that's not just because of COVID, but it's also because like momentum in that realm fell short too. So with me wanting to write a book, I've toyed with the title and the concept or theme of the art of starting over. It's something that I tossed out to a friend years ago when she and I were talking about how we both love the beginning process, the beginning stages of figuring out a brand or a project, and things like that. But I think that phrase equally applies to where I am in life. I'll be 48 at the end of this month, and I ran a studio for 11 years. I worked in house at a hip hotel chain that is now slowly closing. It opened in 2000, now it's closing. It's 2024, and like so end of an era kind of thing. And now that I'm on the other side of both of those things and I'm seeing the path in front of me, I get to ask myself, do I want to do it like I did it before? Or do I want to recreate? Do I want to rethink? Do I want to reapproach? And the answer typically is yes. It's just like, well, how to reapproach is the challenge. So that's what I want to write about, I think. And I think a lot of people are probably grappling with similar things in their lives, whether they be in their second or third phase of their career or not. I think these are common universal questions and challenges we face.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, yes.
Hmm.
Like you said, regardless of COVID, this has been history repeats itself, right?
Right.
People go through different phases of life. And it's so interesting because I still remember in my 20s. Don't you remember in your 20s when you thought, I would meet people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and I would even say, that's never going to happen. That'll never be me. And then all of a sudden, you get into your 30s and 40s and
Oh
you're like,
yeah.
"Oh, all of these things, this is life. This happens to people." And
Yep.
you good and bad, your life takes directions that you just could never have imagined. And but that's all part of being courageous enough to create. Because if you live a life where you're creating, then you are opening up to new adventures and new opportunities. And
Absolutely.
so people, no matter what age they are, when we recognize that, that's when we're able to make a change. And we also are able to see we're able to see opportunity where we never did before
So
in
true.
different areas of life. And that comes from talking to people and having rich conversations and listening to podcasts and reading great books. And some of the best books in the world are autobiographies and biographies because we get to see the lifeline of what happened, and not only what happened, but I love learning how did someone decide? What was the decision making process behind the decision to take this path versus the other path?
Right.
And instead of just kind of like hey, here are the things that you need to do, it's like, no, I want to know the journey. So to know the journey behind what you've done and where you're going is cool.
Agreed. Yeah, it's so true. And I think that's the thing that like has really become crystal clear for me in the past 4 years or so. Is the reason why I got interested in like the first principles idea is through my very limited understanding of economics. Like it's like I've learned through trial and error and like the long, hard, stupid way of like how to run a business. I wasn't a business major in school. I didn't study that stuff, but I ran my studio for 11 years and paid what I call a lot of idiot tax. Like it's one of those things where I just accept those financial losses or that time loss as like as an intellectual and spiritual gain ultimately. And so so many economic principles are rooted in deep natural alliance like with like natural law. And one example is critical thinking skills, for example. There's so much of great branding comes from great understanding. Like, you really have to not only understand the market you're in, but the product you're selling or the service you're offering and the audience you're speaking to. Like, if you don't understand all of those things in a way that is accurate to reality versus a projection, like so many things we do in life are tainted by our own projections and our own assumptions and our own, for lack of a better term, just like kind of guesswork as to like how things work versus knowing how things work. And I think that there's ways to know, and there's ways to, and it's like it's equally easy and difficult because it involves belief systems, and like it involves like being able to like learn how to drop your own belief systems or modify your belief systems if you get new information, and how and why and when to do these kind of things. So and it sounds very nerdy and it sounds very like intellectual or whatever, but it's like ultimately the key to success in so many realms of life, to have clear understanding and have good critical thinking skills around the decisions we're making. Often will change how we think. I mean, it'll change how we think about things once we get the right information and the right ways to measure things.
So how do you do that? Like, how do you do that other than having all of those experiences and making those mistakes? And how do you know when you know what the right answer or direction to take is?
Right. Well, I mean, it's like a lot of it is a lot of it is rooted in like like challenging yourself. Like, you have to challenge your own assumptions. You have to challenge your own belief systems. You have to ask yourself, okay, I believe X, Y, and Z about this audience or this category. Then you have to ask yourself, why do I believe that? Is that true? Let's do some poking some holes in that to see if it will, be resilient enough to like a bit of scrutiny. Often one of the best things one can learn, that I try to practice whenever I can, whenever I think of it, is to really understand the idea of trade-offs in everything we do. Like this very smart economist, speaking of, named Thomas Sowell, who I wish everybody knew, but I never even heard about this guy when I was in college. I don't understand why most people I don't understand why he's not the most like famous economist in the world. He's like at 93 years old, he's a living legend. And one of the things he's most well known for is he said that there are no solutions, there's only trade-offs. And so that's infinitely deep, in the sense that I think that people today, especially in our polarized world, are very good at seeing only half of the trade offs. Like, we're only good at seeing the good trade offs of the thing we want or like, and only the bad trade offs of the thing we don't like or don't want. But we're not good about seeing the good trade offs of the thing we don't like or don't want. And we're not good about seeing the bad trade offs of the thing we do like. And I feel like that is a real issue. I feel like it's a real issue in general. Like, I think it applies to everything. I think it applies to how we spend our energy, what we go after, like the focus on money versus focus on, self and purpose, focus on, what I mean, service to others. It really affects like how we live life. And I think if we all could practice this idea of really challenging our own assumptions, asking ourselves, what are the true trade offs here, both good and bad, of this decision, we would make better decisions.
Do you think that people are really not aware of this, or at least in some way they might not be able to articulate what you just said, but they kind of have that feeling? Do you think people are not aware of that, or are they just ignoring it because they want to make the decision that they want to make?
That's a great question. I can't make a blanket statement that it's all or nothing with that, because I'm sure there's a mix, there's a ratio of some people that are simply ignoring it, some people that are aware of it, but don't practice it. I think a lot of people are very busy and wrapped up in their own little lives in general. And when I say little, my life is little too. We all have our own little bubbles, our own little lives. And so I'm not trying to be
We're all just, what does
insulting.
it say? We're all a speck of sand
Right, exactly. But
will be
together
gone in a moment.
we make the desert together. You know what I mean? Like, one speck of sand is not the desert, but all of us, we create a zone. And so in that way, I feel like there's also such a thing as, like, I mean, another part of branding is really understanding persuasion, and how that works. And there is like an actual method and practice to this stuff, and it's being done on all of us all the time in ways that we might not know about. And so persuasion can stir the pot a little bit in a way that points people away from seeing their own blind spots. You know what I mean? Like we get, for lack of a better term, brainwashed or manipulated into believing a certain thing. And then once you believe it, I think the quote goes that it's easier to lie to someone than it is to convince them that they've been lied to. And so that's the challenge, is that like if we get good at challenging ourselves, that's the best thing we can do for others, because then we're coming more correct. But if we're not good at challenging ourselves and our own assumptions and asking ourselves, well, why do I feel that way? Is that a true statement that I'm saying? Or is it simply a talking point that I heard somewhere that I'm repeating without doing much research as to like if it's actually true or not? And so this applies to everything from diet to exercise to art making to brand building to everything, politics and life. I mean, all of it. So yeah, so it's like it's a really interesting, it's a useful way to, it's tied a bit to an ego death kind of thing, like where we need to like, kill our egos a little bit and like not, it's hard to learn something you think you already know. So if you can just get certainty out of your head, pretend like you don't know things, and ask yourself questions from a beginner's mindset, where it's like, what would this be like? How might this happen? And also long game. Like that's another trick, is that we're very short-term thinkers, all of us, all people. Long-term thinking, when you follow a bold statement all the way to its inevitable endpoint, you could get some eye-opening results if you really follow through with like, okay, well, how does this make sense? And like, and if this was to happen, then what would happen next? And if then what would happen after that? Once you walk yourself down these paths, you start to go like, oh, well, maybe that's not such a good idea after all. I thought this one thing that was innocuous and positive ultimately in the long term is a negative thing, like, and I had no idea. So
Well, a lot of what this is confirmation bias
right.
too. Like, right? It's like you think you have this idea of what it is, and then you can go all day long and Google it, and most people are Googling what they already believe.
Yes.
So of course you're getting fed all that. And the algorithm on all the social media doesn't help because it's feeding you all of these videos. It cracks me up when someone will say to me, I just keep getting all these, you don't see all these videos? And I say, no, our feeds are very different. We're
Right.
interested in different things. So
Yes.
obviously you're consuming what they're sending you. Otherwise, they would stop sending it to you. And so that's really challenging.
Agreed.
And I think this is a really good challenge for people that are listening about long-term thinking, because you're right. Most people are not long-term thinkers. There are some. And when we see them, we recognize them, like Elon Musk. He's
Right.
thinking, how am I going to change the world in 100 years when I'm gone? What am I going to do to contribute and build that? So when you meet really incredible, and many of them are entrepreneurs, right? Because they have a very big vision. Their vision is much bigger than themselves. And you recognize that in them, because so many of us were thinking about, I mean, gosh, so many people aren't even thinking about next year.
Exactly. I mean, it's hard to. I mean, it's definitely hard to do it with certainty. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing. Is there's so many
Well, there's
things.
no certainty,
There's no
Jeremy.
certainty.
I crave certainty like so many other people. We want certainty in our lives, but
Exactly.
there's no certainty. And it's really challenging to get comfortable being uncertain.
It's so
But that's the
true.
only way that we can move forward, because nothing is certain. Literally
Exactly.
nothing.
Exactly. The only thing that can be even remotely close to being certain is our own ability to show up for ourselves over and over. Like that consistency is the closest thing we can get to certainty. I completely agree with you. There is no certainty, and there never will be. But I think that so many errors in my life have come from me feeling certain about something and sticking to it in a way that was ultimately unnatural to like how reality was really playing out. And so, yeah, no, it's a big deal. And Elon's a great example, for sure. So, yeah, it's true.
Oh my gosh, Jeremy, I feel like I did not know where this conversation was going to go, but it went all over the place, and
It sure
it's so
did.
exciting.
Yeah.
I always ask my guests one question,
Yeah.
that is, what is one activity that the listeners can do in 10 minutes or less to live a more creative life?
That's a great question. In 10 minutes or less. That's a good constraint. I would say one of my favorite challenges I give to myself is like I look in the mundane all the time, the mundane, or like urbane, boring stuff we always do for creative challenges. And one of my favorite things to do in writing emails and I've been doing this for years, is I look at writing an email as a creative challenge, specifically in the sign off, because the sign offs that most people use is best or thanks or, sincerely, like these boring fillers at the very end. And it's like one of the many reasons why people hate reading emails or whatever. It's like because they're boring and they're very rote. And so instead, a long time ago, my brother and I used to write letters to each other, handwritten or typed on the typewriter letters and mailed back and forth. And we made these art letters. And so as mail has gone away more and more, and we stopped doing that, like an email took over. I wanted to bring the creative process into the email thing too. And the creative sign off, like usually something that's referencing something we're talking about in the message, or even something that's just silly or random or non sequitur, will be a much more memorable way to end the email than best or yours or anything like that. Like it's
Sincerely.
and I hate to, I have no good example. Like one example I have is I'll, for someone new, if I don't have much context or something funny to write about, the sign off will be secret handshake, comma, my name, or something funny, comma, my name, or something like I'll give a generic one, but frequently they're more relevant than that. Like they're pointed to something in the email that's funny or weird. And it's like just by doing that, I can make someone's whole morning better because they read one email that made them smile. And I've gotten that feedback over the years. So I think that anybody can challenge themselves to look at what they do every day and in the small mundane things in life, and how can you add one spot of creativity and one spot of a smile into what you do.
Ooh, I love that. How can you make somebody else smile?
Hmm.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
I know. I always think about the ending, the salutation. And I switch mine up, and I always am like, I just want to find the one that I love the most. I kind of switch them differently depending like you do, but I
Right.
kind of have a standard few that I use. The one I use the most now is either stay inspired or keep creating.
Yeah. And those are great. I mean, those are both really nice. Definitely, like, no knock on having a good creative choice that you use consistently. Like I think that works wonderfully. So very nice.
Jeremy, I'm excited to read your book.
I'm excited to write it.
We'll have to have you come back on so you can talk about the writing process when you're finished.
Absolutely, for sure. And I'll hit you up for some pointers. I know you wrote your book not too long ago, so congrats on that.
Totally.
Yeah,
Happy to help. You are
cool.
awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Kate. This is a lot of fun.
And there you have it. I told you, we got into all the things. In fact, when I stopped recording with him, I said, okay, I had no idea where this show was going to go, but it went exactly where it was supposed to, because there were some really good ideas in there, especially when I think about challenging our thought process. Right? It's like he said that, and I think, yeah, no, I challenge my thought process, but it has to be something that we do intentionally every single day, because there definitely are areas of my life where I probably think I know something, and that whole confirmation bias plays in, and I have this idea of this is the right way. And really, it is helpful when we think, hey, what if I'm wrong? What if there's a different way? What if there's a better way? And so I hope that there were pieces of this episode that really resonated with you. And of course, I hope you take some time to do that challenge. Think about the mundane, whether it's the signature on your email or the way in which you approach your spouse when you get home today, or maybe it's a text message that you can send to a friend and remind them of a time that you really enjoyed doing some activity with them, or something that you really appreciate about them, or just something really funny to make them laugh. So make someone smile today. Use your creative power to make someone else's day. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you. Until next time, go create something.